Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it is time for a review of the new Paysage d'hiver record, Wald. This is the latest full-length LP from one of Switzerland's longest-running and most well-respected black metal exports, Paysage d'hiver, which upon release has been celebrated as the 2020 crown jewel of black metal. Masterminded by multi-instrumentalist, vocalist, and songwriter Winther, this project has been running since the late 90s and has released well over a dozen splits and albums and EPs since then. And this latest one has been a long time coming, since 2013's Das Tor was the only record that Paysage dropped in the 2010s. It was an album that did make some noise in the American underground as well, as during that time all of this atmospheric black metal and black gaze was popping off over here, and Paysage d'hiver is no stranger to atmosphere and ambience. So now with this new record out, I'm sure hardcore fans have their fingers crossed for a long winter this year so that they can hibernate with this thing. It is 2 full freaking hours long, with nothing but expansive black metal odysseys interrupted by these ambient-leaning, field recording-backed interludes. But to be honest, in my opinion, I think a lot of the creative sound play and compositional work that painted previous releases, previous classic releases, have not shown up as strong on this new release. For one, I think this is the most uninteresting sounding album that Paysage d'hiver has put out in a long time. On the surface, sonically, this seems like your typical lo-fi black metal affair. Very distorted, very brittle, very thin, seems almost basic. But then it becomes even more disappointing as I listen further and I realize not much is translating from these recordings other than these very muddy, droning guitars, which have a lot less bite than they have had on previous efforts. And it's not even simply that these are low fidelity recordings. There are tons of amazing classic black metal records that are low fidelity. This project is responsible for some of them. The sonic clarity of the recordings here isn't as much the issue as these tracks slowly losing shape for me as I listen to them, just kind of turning into background noise the further they grind on, which can even happen on a high fidelity recording. And in my opinion, this is a pretty strong contrast from the multiple recordings from Das Tor where the drums, guitars, and vocals are all pretty clearly defined. However, the production on Wald, by comparison, feels a lot more constrained and one note. More slushy than I would say wintry. Take the song Alt, for example. The guitars on this track are just pure static. The vocals are so burnt, they're barely there. And then the drums sound like what you would get if you were just ferociously banging on wooden boxes. Then the atmospheric synthesizers thrown into the mix are just so ill-defined they're melting into themselves and adding basically nothing. It's like spilling watercolor all over a piece that was pretty impressionistic to begin with. Now, there is at least some semblance of sonic variety amongst the record's core songs. The opening track features some very tight keyboard runs that were totally unexpected. They sound like a sped-up version of something that you might hear off of a old-school prog synth epic. Then there is Le Rêve Lucide, which in my opinion is the most ferocious sounding song on the entire record. This one really has a bite to the guitars. Kilte Shower features some pretty atmospheric synth passages on the back end that aren't bad. There is also some ghoulish shouting in the second half of STIMMEN im Wald, which sounds like a voice reverberating up from a dungeon. These moments and others do create some touchstones across the record, but never are they enough to make a single song interesting from front to back. Which leads me to some of the more compositional elements of this LP, the riffs, the lead melodies, the chord progressions that are worked into these tracks too. In my opinion, this batch is not fresh. The riffs and leads performed throughout this LP sound like some of the most tired lo-fi black metal cliches I've heard, stretched so thin they could go around the earth twice. The slow and brooding riff on the track Viter immer Viter is so mind-numbing and so basic as it drags on and on and on. It feels like I'm experiencing a tinnitus simulator. These really are some of the most tedious and unimaginable riffs and melodies I've heard in a while. The only melody that to me on this entire record that felt remotely, I don't know, memorable memorable was on the intro to STIMMEN Wald that I mentioned earlier. Now, looking at the track list for this LP, you would think that for a moment you could take solace in the fact that these ambient interludes are going to create some diversity across the LP, some separation between these tracks. These interludes will provide some kind of much-needed variety, but pretty much all of them are painted by what sounds like the same noisy, cyclical field recording going on, just grinding on in the background over and over and over, which just comes off distracting, unnecessary, and adding to this record's severe feeling of redundancy. This record finishes off with a 19-minute grand finale, the song So Halte es wieder, which I do give credit for having more sonic space than a majority of the other tracks here, but that comes mostly by way of this groaning and droning reverbed guitar riff that sort of plays over the core instrumental, not really connecting with it in any significant way. While sonically there is this extra dynamic component to it that's good, compositionally it's not really all that much greater than anything else here. So overall, I'm just getting so little out of this, unfortunately. I'm not really hearing what makes this one of the best black metal releases of 2020, or what makes this one of the best Paysage projects in general. In fact, it actually kind of reminds me of previous releases like Knocked, which, in my opinion, was similarly packed with uninspired chord progressions and a lot of sonic haze. The most major difference I'm hearing here is that Wald is stretched out over a very arduous 2 hours. Feeling a light to decent 3 on this one? Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Paysage forever.